Okay, so in Ethiopia, when you have a guest over, the first thing you offer them is coffee. They actually call it a coffee ceremony because it involves making coffee from scratch. We use green beans, unroasted green beans, and we're gonna roast it. And we have all the supplies and equipments we need for making coffee. So this represents the grass that traditionally they would cut real grass from outside that's aromatic and just to cover the floor. I have this on a counter, but traditionally they actually make the coffee on the floor. And this is called sini. This is our cup that we're going to use to drink coffee. It's made of ceramic coffee. And we have here the jabana. So this is our coffee pot. It's made out of clay. So first we're going to bring our unroasted coffee. So you would have to wash it. So this is a wok that we use. It's like a wok. So this is where we're going to roast our coffee with. So you would have to wash it because it may have some debris and you need to get rid of the skin from the coffee. So how you would wash it is you would have to like scrub it between your hands like this and rinse it off, and then it's ready to roast. Okay, so I'm gonna put it in my stove right here. And then make sure when you're roasting coffee inside, make sure the house is ventilated because the smoke from the coffee while you're roasting may set off your smoke alarm. So what we're gonna do is when you're roasting the coffee, you just move it around like this. Otherwise, the bottom is gonna get scorched, and you wanna also make sure it's roasted evenly. So you just keep moving it around like that. So by the way, you can find all of these things at the Ethiopian grocery stores. Here in Portland, they have a couple in Northwest Portland. There's one on MLK. It's called Mercado. So they have all this coffee supplies. And also you can use like a frying pan. Doesn't have to be a non-stick, but you can try to make it using that. So gonna roast like that. So you just have to make sure you keep moving it around. And what we're looking for is when the coffee is done roasting, it needs to be like between a brown and dark. That's usually the Ethiopian coffee. This is how it's gonna look like. Okay, so we're gonna keep moving around this. All right. So since I already have roasted one in the morning, I usually actually roast my coffee outside to make sure it's safe for the smoke alarm. So I'm gonna take this one out and I'm gonna show you. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grind this coffee in our coffee grinder. Okay, so traditionally they would use a mortar and pestle to grind this by hand, but you can use just a coffee grinder at home. I'm gonna plug this in. So this is about like 3/4 cup of coffee. Like that. Okay. So it doesn't have to be like finely ground. It's just going to be like a coarse ground. Okay, so this is what it's going to look like. All right, so I'm actually going to add about 2 cups of water to my coffee maker, jabana. We call it jabana. I'm adding some water. Then you can warm up the water first, but you don't have to. I didn't. I'm just going to add the ground coffee to it now. Okay. So this coffee is actually believed to have been first discovered in Ethiopia. So this was in the 15th century. So the story is, I read this online actually. There was a man, his name was Khalid. He was a goat herder. So one day he was herding his goats and he noticed his goats were very energized and almost jumping. And he was looking for the source to figure out what was happening. And he found this coffee beans tree. So he took some of the beans and gave it to some monks at the time. And the monks thought that must be some work of the devil. So they threw it into a fire. So the smoke that was coming out of the coffee beans being roasted, right, ended up energizing them as well. And they were up praying and they kept using it. So that's how coffee first originated from. Actually, the country Yemen is the one who introduced brewed coffee first, though. They're the ones who introduced it to the world. So, yeah, that's the story of coffee. Okay. So we're gonna just move this like that. And then just keep it in this. And then just gonna let it boil like that, about like 15 minutes or so. So this is almost like a slow cooker because it's made out of clay, so it might take a little bit longer than a traditional coffee pot. So the way, just like when you make coffee in a coffee maker, you're gonna start to see some steam coming out of this. So that means it's ready, but sometimes it might boil over. So what people do is you would have a cup ready and then you would like pour some out like this and then you just put it back. That helps it not to overboil. Okay, but now I have some coffee which is already made in the bag. So I'm gonna bring that because it might take some time to boil and I will show you. Once the coffee is done brewing, so you're gonna take it out of the heat and then you're gonna let it sit for a little bit because you want the powder coffee need to settle down and you want to make sure you're putting down slanted like this. And then you wait about a few minutes and when you're ready to pour it over, the ground coffee is not gonna get mixed in. So I have one that's already made. So this is a bigger jabana. Usually you use this when you have a bigger get together or restaurants use this. So I'm just gonna pour some coffee. And if you have a guest that doesn't drink coffee, spice tea is also traditional to offer in Ethiopia. It's like Indian chai, uses the same spice like cloves, cinnamon, and also green cardamom, and you add black tea to that. You would not add milk like chai. Basically, that's what you would offer. But mostly, people in Ethiopia like coffee, so this is how you would serve it to them. Okay, now we're gonna make shiro. Shiro is a chickpea flour stew. The ingredients we need to make the shiro stew is we have powder chickpea flour. This is called shiro. So basically it's ground chickpea. This is what this one is. We need 2 Roma tomatoes, diced or pureed like that. And we have about half a cup diced red onions. We also need garlic to make this dish, and I'm going to be using olive oil. You can use any oil that you use for cooking. The other ingredient we're going to use is berberine. So berberine is a chili powder, and I'll explain what's in this spice as we're cooking. Okay, so first thing we're gonna do is add the onions. It's about half a cup. And we're gonna cook this onions for about 5 minutes. We need it to be nice and soft. So when you buy Shiro, which the Shiro powder, I got this from Ethiopian stores. There are two kinds that you can buy. There is one that comes already spiced, meaning to the chickpea they add berberine spice, garlic and ginger and other spices. So if you have this, it makes it easy. You don't have to add a lot of spices while you're cooking. For today, just to show you how we cook with berberine, I'm gonna add. So it might make it a little bit spicier, but you don't need to add that. Or you can buy a plain Shiro powder, and while you're cooking, then you're gonna be adding all the other spices. Okay, so we're gonna mix this a little bit. You're gonna cook it like medium heat for this one. Turn this down. Okay, so most people know chickpea here, I guess, for making hummus. I use this for hummus as well. And now we're gonna add a little bit of oil, about 3 tablespoons. I'm using olive oil. I have tried this with like avocado oil, which they say is good for cooking. You can use that if you have that. Okay. Okay. So Shiro, I love making Shiro what now, but growing up, that's not usually in Ethiopia, it's not their most favorite dish. The reason is Shiro is a dish that's made the most in Ethiopia because it's cheap to buy, it's very widely available, so people will get tired of it because we eat a lot of it. So it's like something that you would buy if you're on a budget. But here I don't make it that often, but when you make it, it's also the way you make Shiro. Sometimes back home there are large families in a household, so the way they make it, they may not have enough of the berberine and all the other spices you add to making Shiro. So like going to restaurants, you would enjoy it more. Okay, so now I'm gonna add a little bit of the berberine. So that's about 2 tablespoons. I'm adding 2 tablespoons of berberine. So berberine is also one of the staples of Ethiopian cooking. Almost every day, the stews that we make, we use berberine. And so what berberine is made of mainly is this chili. It's called California or New Mexico chili here. And to this chili, you add other spices like I have this black seed. This is called black seed that goes in the berberine. And we have ajwain seed that also goes in the berberine, and dried garlic and ginger. So usually, since they use it every day back home, they make one. Yeah, I'm gonna add a little bit of water so it doesn't stick. So we're gonna cook this about 5 minutes. Then we'll add our tomato puree. So their chilies are seasonal. So when they're in season, people would buy a big bulk of this. It's something they would use for a year. So basically you buy the chilies and you wash it, and then also wash all the other spices and the ginger, the garlic, and they put it outside to dry in the sun. Or sometimes they actually roast it on a griddle inside the house. And when that happens, usually you don't want to be inside the house because the smoke coming from the chilies would burn your eyes and all that. And then they take that to a place to grind it for them, and then you bring it and you store it, and you have berberine for a year. So that's how they do it. Yeah. Okay, next I'm adding tomatoes. You know, like I said, for this one, since this is already spiced shiro, you do not need to add barberry. Okay. All right. Okay, now while this is cooking, I'm also going to add my ginger. This is about 2 cloves of minced ginger. Add some sugar. Okay. All right. So this one, I'm going to add some water to my shiro and then mix it. The reason is if I just put it in, it might get lumpy. This helps it to be nice and smooth. Okay. This is basically just cold water I'm adding to it. Okay. And this is about 5 tablespoons of shiro powder. Okay. Add a little more. Okay. All right. Okay. So all we need to do is just cook this for about 15 minutes. So basically, you know it's done. When you try it, you don't want it to, you know, taste like a flour, basically. Okay. So traditionally, you will serve this if you have shiro, romaine lettuce salad, Ethiopian salad. You can serve that on the side, like on top of the injera, and I'll show you that when I'm done with this. Okay, then I'm gonna add a little bit of salt to taste. So you can leave this vegan. So basically this is all vegan ingredients, but you can also add Ethiopian spiced butter for a vegetarian. Okay, so that's all we have to do for the shiro, and we'll serve it over our injera. Okay, so to go with our shiro dish, now we're gonna make what we call in Ethiopia atarkuk. Atarkuk is a yellow split piece dish. So basically, it doesn't need a lot of spices. The only thing we're gonna add is actually turmeric. So with the last dish, you need barberry, all those spices. But with this one, you can make it from spices that you can buy from a grocery store. And this is actually favored by mostly young kids in Ethiopia because it's very mild. So for anyone who's not into spices, this will be a good entry into Ethiopian food. So first thing I'm gonna do is, so to make the yellow split piece, I have diced yellow onions, about ½ cup. And I have minced garlic and ginger. It's about a teaspoon each. And I have yellow split peas, which I already cooked. The reason is it makes it easier if you already have cooked yellow split peas, because they do tend to take longer when you're cooking it. So first thing we're going to do is cook the onions in a pan like that. So, that is too hot. So we're going to cook this about 5 minutes. And it's a little bit too hot. Okay. So next I'm going to add a little bit of olive oil, about 2 tablespoons. And we're just going to cook the onions in the oil about 2 minutes. Okay, next we're gonna add our turmeric, just about a teaspoon. So when we cook with berbere, we usually cook it a little bit longer because there's a lot of other spices added in the berbere which need time to simmer. But when you're cooking with turmeric, you just cook it 2 minutes and that's all it needs. Then garlic and ginger goes next. May add a little bit of oil to this one. So garlic and ginger is also one of the most common seasoning spices that you add to any stews. So the ratio usually is more of the garlic and less of the ginger. I tend to use equal parts of garlic and ginger. Okay. Now we're ready to add our split peas. There we go. Okay. So once you add the split peas, basically you're gonna cover the peas with water and just let it cook. Since I already boiled the split peas, it may just take about 10-15 minutes. But if you're using raw split peas, which I sometimes do, it might take about 40 minutes. So when the split peas are done cooking, you will garnish with jalapenos. These are seeded jalapenos sliced. You add this towards the end, and our split peas is ready to be served. So the shiro and the yellow split peas that we cooked earlier is going to be served on injera. So injera is an Ethiopian fermented flatbread. It's made with a grain called teff. So teff is the tiniest grain. It's gluten-free. It's believed to be superfood because it has the lowest amount of sugar, so it's a good grain. So basically, to prepare the dough, you would mix the teff flour with water and you let it sit for about 2-3 days. You check to see if it's fermented, and if it's not ready, you would add more teff to it. It's basically like making a sourdough bread. You would have to feed it to keep the fermentation going. So I use, to mix the dough, you would need like a food processor, or you can use a hand mixer. I use a hand mixer because it's easier to do. So basically, when it's ready, you need a pan like this. It needs to be a non-stick pan, and we're gonna pour the dough like that. So we're gonna swirl it around to cover the pan. So the pan needs to be really nice and hot. And while it's cooking, you'll see the injera will form some bubbles on top. You wait until it's cooked halfway. Then we're gonna cover the injera to finish cooking. Usually this takes about 30 seconds. It's a very quick process. My stove is not very hot. Okay, still a little bit to go. Then we're gonna use this to take out the injera. It's made of grass. Got it from an Ethiopian store. You can get there from. Traditionally, we actually use a bigger griddle. If you've been to Ethiopian restaurants, the injera usually it's really big. Yeah. Okay, so our injera is ready now. So basically, you come in and take it out like that, and that's what the injera looks like. All right, and now we're ready to let it dry, and we'll keep making more injera, and then we're gonna serve our stews on top of our injera. So the dishes we prepared earlier, the shiro and the yellow split peas, are common in the city I grew up in, Addis, but the place where my parents are from, their hometown, Chickpea is one of the most popular dish, and it's also my favorite and my kids' favorite. Every time we go to Ethiopian restaurant, this is one of the things that we order, which is Chickpea. So to make the Chickpea, we're gonna need Ethiopian clarified butter, which I'm gonna prepare right now. So we have the stove on medium heat. I have about 2 pounds of unsalted butter, and we're gonna add some Ethiopian spices. Actually, before I get this melted, I wanna prepare some spice to go with the butter. That's what's gonna make it spiced Ethiopian butter. So some of the spices that go on this clarified butter, first one is a black cardamom. I'm adding about 2 tablespoons, and we have some cumin, about ½ teaspoon, and I have some ajwain seed, again about ½ teaspoon to teaspoon. You mostly need the black cardamom, and I'm gonna add the black seed. We call it dugurazmud in Ethiopia. You need just a little bit of the black seed. So you're just gonna toast this about a minute. You just want it to get aromatic. That's when you know it's ready to be grinded. Okay. All right, now I'm gonna put this aside to let it cool down, and then I'm gonna grind it in my coffee grinder. In the meantime, I'll bring my butter back in here. So this whole thing might take about 45 minutes, melting the butter with the spices. So basically put it in a coffee grinder. That I actually already have. This is on my online eleniskitchen.com. This is the same thing that I just did, spiced butter spices. So once we grind that, the only thing we need to add is, this is what we call koseret. It smells like more like a sage leaf. So I've got some up here already, so I'm just gonna go ahead and add that. So what happens when you're clarifying butter is the water and the butter is just gonna evaporate, and the milk, first it's gonna be like foamy, you're gonna see it on top, and then it's gonna start to sink down. So that's when you know the butter is ready. It's gonna turn into between yellow and golden. So I already have one that's already being clarified. So I'm just gonna show you how you strain it when it's done. Once it's done. So this is a wood you would use. It's like when you do barbecue, you know, people use like different kinds of wood to smoke the barbecue. So it's basically the same thing. This gives it a smoky flavor to the spice butter, which is really good. So all I'm gonna do is you just wait until you see a little bit smoke coming out of the wood. So it's a special kind of wood they use. See, and now it has a little bit of the wood, the smoke. So basically, just whatever container you're using, you just want the smoke, the flavor to stay in the bottle. Yeah. Just a little bit. Now you can smell it's smoky. So when we I have to get this. So this is one I already have prepared. Now it's going to give it a really nice smoky flavor. Okay, so our butter is ready. So now what we're going to do is to make the kitfo. So kitfo traditionally is served raw. People just eat raw meat, tartare, that's what they call it, tartare meat. I usually cook it a little bit on the stove, but I would show you how traditionally they would warm up this clay bowl first. Basically, you drizzle the butter while you're mixing the kitfo, like that. So it does take a lot of butter to make the kitfo. So I think that's probably good enough. Into this, we're going to add mitmita. So mitmita is a chili spice, spicier than the berbere that we use to cook in our lentils or shiro what. You do that. It's sticking a little bit because it's cold. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move it to this pan and just cook it a little bit. But traditionally, they would just mix it like that, and that's it. And then put it up here. You want to put the heat low. And then mix it really quick. So while you're mixing, add a little bit of the mitmita, like that. And you would add a little bit of salt. And then one of the spices you need is the black cardamom. We already had the black cardamom in the butter, but you also need it while you're making the kitfo, like that. So this is for people who wouldn't want to eat raw meat. So you just cook it a little bit like that for them. But you want to keep the heat really low. And the kind of meat you need to use when you're making kitfo needs to be really lean, red meat. Okay. All right, so this is cooked a little bit. We'll serve the kitfo with gojo. That's a flat bread that's traditionally eaten in the Gurage zone. Usually it's hard to buy from a store or Ethiopian stores, so we would eat it with injera. So traditionally food is served in a shareable platter like this. People will sit around and eat from one plate. So the stews are plated first, usually are the main dish. Then you would have side salads. So if you have 4 people sitting to eat, you would portion it out for 4 people. And the same thing with the other side dishes. Here I have the yellow split peas. Putting it down like that. So this will be like a vegetarian dish. And since we have our kitfo, which is now well cooked, usually will be some pink in there. Okay. There we go. So this is what a traditional Ethiopian plate would look like.